Fred, too. Well, hello. Welcome to our Bible study. I'm Fred Davis, pastor of Mending Fences Cowboy Church. We're located in Lebanon, Tennessee, but our location is on Highway 109, just south of Gallatin, Tennessee. You pass the river, and we're at the former Reba McIntyre barn. Going south, it's located on the left. We meet on Sunday mornings there at the barn facility. We have a great time of worship. God is blessing. We are grateful for all that God is doing. And we thank you for being with us today. We're studying in the book of Acts. We've gone verse by verse, chapter by chapter through the entire book of Acts. And we are today in chapter 27. And we're going to pick up in the events of the life of the Apostle Paul. He has been threatened, he's been beaten, he's been put into prison. And now we find that he is going to go through a great struggle on the sea because he will be shipwrecked, as we're going to pick up on this. And so in chapter 27 and verse 25, here's what it says. Paul is talking to those that are on the ship. Take courage, for I believe God. That's an important statement that Paul is making, that all of us ought to live by in our life when he says, I believe God. It doesn't matter what you're going through, the struggles of life, the difficulties that you're faced with, and I don't know what everyone's going through, and your circumstances may be more difficult than someone else. But take courage. Believe God. It will be just as he said. But we will be shipwrecked on an island. Paul is telling them that we are about to be shipwrecked on an island. In verse 27, about midnight on the 14th night of the storm. Now, they've been out there a long time. There's been a tremendous storm that has been blowing for a period of time. And so we are being driven across the Sea of Adara. The sailors sensed land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was about 120 feet deep. But a little later, they measured again and found that it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid that they would soon be driven against the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. If you have ever been on the ocean, the waves can become extremely high. And if it's at night, you don't know exactly what is taking place. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship. And what took place was they were praying for daylight to come. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and to the soldiers, "You will all unless the sailors stay on board. But Paul said, you must stay with the ship. So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and they let it drift away. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for, listen, 2 weeks. Please eat something now for your own good. But not a hair of your head will perish. What we see here is the Apostle Paul in the midst of a terrible storm. There was fear that the ship would be sunk. And he is telling them, please, hear what I am saying. And so they were worried. They had been there for 2 weeks, and they had not eaten anything. For not a hair of your head will perish. Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat the bread. All 276 of us, can you imagine? On those ancient ships, there were 276 people on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to the shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchor, lifted them in the sea, and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders and raised the foresail and headed toward shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the boat struck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they did not swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to the planks or the debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to the shore. You see, Paul's prophecy was correct. They had 276 people on board. When Paul said that not a hair of their head would be destroyed, they jumped overboard and they began to swim as the boat was breaking apart. Verse 42. The soldiers wanted to keep the prisoners to make sure they did not swim and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul. Why? Paul was able to help them. He fed them. He told them that not one of them would lose their life. The others held on to the planks and the debris, and everyone escaped safely to the shore. So here was a shipwreck. The ship began falling apart, but every single person was spared. So we come now to chapter 28, verse 1. Once we were safe on shore, we learned that we were on the Isle of Malta. The people of the island were very kind to us. It was cold and rainy, so they built a fire on the shore to welcome us. So they've gone from shipwreck to the Isle of Malta, and the natives of Malta were open and warm and receptive. They built a fire so that the people could become warm by the fire. In chapter 28 and verse 3, as Paul gathered an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire, listen carefully, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, bit him on the arm. The people of the island saw it hanging from his hand and said to each other, "A murderer, no doubt. Though he escaped the sea, justice will not permit him to live." But Paul shook off the snake into the fire and was unharmed. The people waited for him to swell up and to suddenly drop dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw that he wasn't harmed, they changed their minds and decided he was a god. So they've gone from the fact that he was a demon or devil to the fact that he was a god. Near the shore where they landed was an estate belonging to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us and treated us kindly for 3 days. As it happened, Publius' father was ill with fever and dysentery. Paul went in, prayed for him, and laying his hands on him, he healed him. Then all the other sick people on the island came and were healed. As a result, we were showered with honors, and when the time came to sail, people supplied us with everything we would need for the trip. This was quite an experience. The ship has run aground. The waves has caused the ship to start coming apart. People jumped overboard, 276. Where they found planks from the ship, they held on to the planks, and they made their way to the Isle of Malta. That is so very important. What we're seeing here is the hand of God on the Apostle Paul. He took some of the planks and put them on the fire. A reptile came out and bit Paul on the arm. They saw the snake hanging from his hand. He shook it off into the fire. Everybody waited for Paul to swell up from the poison and to drop over dead. That's not what happened. You see, God was with him. If your Father is in heaven, Jesus is your Savior. It does not matter what you're going through. God is with you. He will be with you. And that's what happened with the Apostle Paul. He did not die. He conquered the poisonous attack. The snake was thrown into the fire. Publius, who was the chief of the people on this island, his father was very sick. Paul went into him, laid hands on him, and he was raised up and was healed from his sickness. All of the people of the island that were sick, they came to Paul, and Paul healed them as well. That is the power of God in the midst of the storm. Well, we're going to pick up with this at our next time together. I hope you'll read these verses and see how that God is always prepared to meet our needs. I hope you have a blessed day. I went over on that one.
I wanted to tell you.